All right, so where we left off. Okay. The left endpoint I calculated in the first part was negative pi. My right endpoint is pi. There's my negative pi. There's my pi. Well, obviously, my halfway point, since they're opposites of each other, is 0. Halfway between 0 and pi would be pi over 2, so that's my 3/4 point in this shot. Halfway between 0 and negative pi is negative pi over 2, so that's the first quarter point. Cosine usually starts at the maximum, but because it's a negative, it's going to start at the minimum. In this case, negative 2. At the halfway point, it's going to reach its maximum because it's a negative. And then go back down to repeat to that. If I add 2 pi to pi, I'm going to be at 3 pi. Try to eyeball. And there we go. All right, the last type we're going to talk about is vertical transformations. They're caused by the constant d outside. All right, it can come after the function or before the function. It's not going to matter. And that's going to affect, not going to affect the amplitude, it's going to affect the range. Because the amplitude is still the same. So in other words, if I do this, if I look at this, 1/2 sine x plus 2. Okay? So that means normally my max would be at 1/2, my minimum would be at negative 1/2. All you do is you take this value and you add to it. 1/2 plus 2 is 2.5. Negative 1/2 plus 2 is 1.5. So my range shifts up too. So 1.5, 2.5. Okay? My 0 also shifts. We'll talk about that in a second. It's going to go up too. So instead of us starting at 0, okay, there's no vertical transformation, and there's no change in period. Okay, so this is 2 pi. That's pi. Pi over 2. It's 3 pi over 2. All right. Make sure you graph correctly. So there's 2.5. And there's 1.5. Halfway between them is 2. That becomes your new 0. So in other words, instead of starting and ending at 0, the graph will start and end at whatever that does to it. Remember, with a sine graph in the middle, it's at 0, 2, so it's going to be at 2. Okay, there's my quarter point. It's going to reach its max. Back to 0, minimum, boom. I have my graph. The domain, what a surprise, all real numbers. The period, since there's no coefficient of x, is 2 pi. The amplitude, the number right in front of it, is 1/2. The left endpoint, because there's no vertical shift, is 0, and the right endpoint is 2 pi. All right? Unless there's a shift, that will always be 0, and that will always be the end of the period. 2 more. Y equals cosine 2x plus pi over 3 minus 3. Okay, so first thing I do, 2x plus pi over 3 set equal to 0. 2x equals negative pi over 3. X equals negative pi over 6. So that's my left endpoint, negative pi over 6. We just set whatever's inside parentheses equal to 0. All right, the right endpoint, we now have a coefficient of x in this one. So 2 pi over b becomes 2 pi over 2, which is just pi. That means our period is pi. And to get our right endpoint, we add them, 5 pi over 6. Amplitude, since there's no number in front of the cosine, we assume is 1. The domain, like a constant, is all real numbers. Now the range, because of the minus 3, okay, basically instead of 1, negative 1, okay, we're going to subtract 3 from both those values. Come over here. So in other words, 1, negative 1, we're going to subtract 3. When I do 1 minus 3, I got negative 2. When I do negative 1 minus 3, I have negative 4. All right, which means when I graph, here's my negative 2, here's my negative 4. Doesn't need to be perfect. Just make sure negatives are below. My left endpoint is negative pi over 6. My right endpoint is 5 pi over 6, which means my next cycle will end at 11 pi over 6. My range is negative 4 to negative 2, based upon the minus 3. All right, it is a cosine, so we're going to start at our max. All right, so at negative pi over 6, we're going to start at negative 2. 5 pi over 6, we're going to return to our max. Halfway between them, we're going to be at our min. And the other points, we would be at 0. Well, instead of 0, we should be at whatever that value is. For those of you that haven't figured that out yet. So negative 3. So we're going here to here to there. Now we've got to figure out what those points are. Negative pi over 6 plus 5 pi over 6 is 4 pi over 6. Half of 4 is 2. So 2 pi over 6 gives me pi over 3 for my halfway point. All right. Pi over 3 is 2 pi over 6. 2 plus 5 is 7. Unfortunately, that's odd, so we double the denominator. That gives us 7 pi over 12. Going this way, 2 pi over 6 minus pi over 6 is pi over 6. Half of that, because 1 is pi over 12. That means at those points I'm going to be at the negative 3. And then again, I just repeat myself to create the other cycle. Last one, 4 plus 3 sine x minus pi over 4. Okay, so left endpoint, pi over 4. Right endpoint, since there's no coefficient of x, would be 9 pi over 4. All right, hopefully everybody's good with that. Amplitude is 3. All right, but I'm adding 4. So if my amplitude was 3, normally it'd be 3 negative 3. But I add 4. Makes my left end, makes my range, if I add 3 to the negative, if I add 4 to the negative 3, I'm at 1. And if I add 4 to the positive 3, I'm at 7. So 1, 7 is my range. Domain, all real numbers. We can count on it. The period, because there's no coefficient of x, is 2 pi. The left endpoint we found to be pi over 4. And the right endpoint we found in the very beginning to be 9 pi over 4. All right, so since my range is 1 to 7, I'm going to do those first. Halfway between 1 and 7 is 4, matching up with my original vertical shift. The left endpoint at pi over 4. The right endpoint at 9 pi over 4. Puts the endpoint on my second cycle at 17 pi over 4. Because it's a sine, normally I start at 0, but because the 4 is outside, 0 plus 4 is 4. So I'm going to start at pi over 4, and I'm going to end at 9 pi over 4. 1 plus 9 is 10. Half of 10 is 5. So my halfway point is 5 pi over 4, which would also be at 4 now instead of 0. 1 pi over 4 plus 5 pi over 4 is 6 pi over 4. Half of that is 3 pi over 4, which is where my max would be at 3 pi over 4, which is at 7, because 3 plus the 4 is the 7. 5 plus 9 is 14. Half of 14 is 7, so that's 7 pi over 4, which would be at 1 because of the shift. And then I just repeat myself here. Try to sketch it out as best I can. Realize that's my graph. It's a lot, I know. So you got to make sure you ask questions as we go along. All right? Be good. Stay safe. Stay healthy.